Hello everybody, I'm Nathan. Got another short little bite-sized Arduino programming tip here for you, piggybacking off of the first video where we talked briefly about the value of creating these sort of print divide functions. I'm going to move on to another thing that often crops up when I'm developing a larger piece of Arduino software, which is debug printing. And especially when I'm like refactoring code and trying to get things to do what they used to do a week ago, but in a different way or something like that, where I want the same results. Oftentimes I want to debug a lot of really quick data about the changes of values of variables and so on. But once the program gets bigger, I have a lot of things I possibly want to debug, and it's really difficult to create a system that actually like debugs what I want to debug without giving me too much information to confuse me and so on and so forth. So I've gotten into the habit of another type of function that I'll have in my little print utils library that I make myself, is having a debug print group of functions that I can also use. So the point of this is that it's oftentimes we run into a circumstance like this. So let's say you have some definition up here where you're defining a macro, which if you don't really know what these are and are not comfortable with them, don't get in the habit of using them until you check them out. They can be quite dangerous. One thing that is good practice is to put your... Alright, so anyway, so we're saying we're putting one in data log active. We're saying this data logging is on. We are going to data log. And then down here in like our setup, for instance, we're pretending like this is our data log. We're calling if data log active, yes, do this stuff, right? And then we'll have our actual code and actual program. But assume that we actually have like 20 or 30 different types of data log data points that we're tracking. We're tracking them at different speeds or in different circumstances. And or we'll call this actually data log print, or data log debug. All right. And we have to sort of troubleshoot the data log maybe like once a week for the next month. So we've inserted all these print statements for different testing areas, and we want to leave them in there, but then because we know we're going to probably have to put them back later on at some point to test the same thing again, and we want to have some sort of system to be able to turn off whether or not they print. So oftentimes people will do these sort of if statements, which are fine, but it takes quite a while to go in and find the if statements and whatever, and it just seemed like there was a better way of doing things. And what I ended up doing is creating these functions. They're called like dprint functions, or like debug print functions. And at first I started by just having a dprint, and then within the function itself say, okay, well, if data log debug, so basically if this is set to anything other than 0, then serial print the message that you passed into me. And then this message is typically like a string or something like that. And then that's fine. And then also created, basically sort of different variants of these. And then we could have a dprintln, which we'll call a serial println with the message. Besides that, the same thing. Oh, and then we need to actually call this string message. Great. And then that's all cool. That's fine. That worked. And then it can be good if you have like a master debug. But once your program gets a little bit bigger, you're going to have a lot of these different components. Like maybe you have like Lux sensors, and then you also have a multiplexer, and then you have some LEDs. And all these have there's different times when you're testing them and want to debug them. So another way to sort of expand on this system is then to add something like LED debug. And then we'll call LED debug, we'll give that a 1, so then the LEDs will debug. And then we can go in here and we can do, create a overloaded version of our dprint, which not only takes in the string that we're trying to print, but it also takes in a sort of flag, which is basically telling it whether or not to actually print it or not. So instead of looking now at a global variable, and this is what makes these debug print functions actually something that we can put into a class and then use in a more general purpose sense, is now we can say if to print, so if this is greater than 0, if it's not false, then we can print our message. Great. Now, then we can have, we'll change our serial printlns here to a dprintln, and then we will give it data log debug. And then once we've written that once, we can go in here, and then this is a nice quick tip, is we can do Command F on a Mac, or I believe it's Control F on the Windows to bring up our find, and then we'll paste that that function that we just had right here. We will and then that won't be our find, that will be our replace, and then serial println find replace. We'll make sure we don't get those right there. Cool. And then right here. Now it does take up like a little bit more typing overall, depending on the length of this sort of variable right here. So if this was just called debug instead of data log debug, then it'll be a lot shorter, for instance, right? But we chose a relatively long one. But then the nice thing about that is we can also so we can get rid of our if statement here. Get rid of that. We'll select this and do Command T to auto format just that section. But yeah, so then let's say we also have the LED stats as well. Let's pretend. So we'll deprint it down here, or we'll just copy and print it down here, and we'll just say LED results are, and then change this. And we're getting rid of these guys because we have our print divides. Cool. All right, awesome. And then these, just a little bit of cleaning up. So generally you want any sort of includes or defines at the very top of the script. All right. And then, great. So now we'll verify that. See if there's any bugs that we had. dprintln. Oh, we did not create our dprintln, so I'll just copy this over. We'll add an ln here. We'll add an ln here. We have our dprintln. All right, and we upload to Arduino. Boom. Printed our data log, it printed our LEDs, fantastic. And then now, let's pretend our program gets really, really big. We can go in and we can change these debug values. We can choose specifically what we want to debug. And then in some programs I'll have maybe a dozen of these or 20 of these with different levels of granularity, and it allows me to really examine what's going on my Arduino in a circumstance where I'm not able to really get that when there's just too much data overall, and I want to be able to just troubleshoot a very specific thing. Oh, we forgot to change this to LED debug. Like, why is that not doing it? So basically the idea is that, you know, whatever we pass into the beginning here will determine if it debugs. And this is something that is expandable. So in later videos, I'll show you how to change this, so we have a few issues with this current code here, right? So the first one is that our divides are expecting a string. So if we pass like an integer of like 7, and we want to have that in there, it wouldn't be able to handle that. So I'll show you how to a few different ways to address that. Then we're also going to look at how to move these different functions into its own reusable sort of file that you can then later on call in and then be able to use in under different circumstances, and then be able to also sort of expand some of these a little bit, make them more useful, look at different ideas that I have about what we can really do with these sort of printer helpers. And yeah, if you have any comments or suggestions on things that you could possibly do with this, or things to add, or just sort of, you know, requests for future quick Arduino tip trick videos,